Just because your audience understands the message doesn't mean that they care about it. If you're presenting or telling a story and you want someone to change, the only thing more powerful than someone who has to change is someone who wants to change. You have to make your message clear. You have to make it compelling. But that trust is something you build over all the stories you tell. It's not just, the story that's in front of you. That trust is the foundation. I believe very strongly you don't have to be born a good storyteller. It's a skill you can learn.
Oh my God, Dios mío, this is, oh my God, Dios mío.
Welcome back to Hotfix. Our guest today is Roshan Gupta. Roshan brings over 20 years of experience in product management and has served as a product manager at Meta and a group product manager at Google. At Google, he led the messages and rich communication services teams with over 300 people. Today, Roshan is the founder of AmplifyPM, an educational platform for product managers on how to become more impactful leaders. In today's episode, we talked about Roshan's fascinating career transition from leading major product teams at Google to founding his own one-person company in Portugal. Roshan shared a failure story from his time at Google, where he worked on a product called Google Allo. Google Allo was a messaging service in a highly competitive market and ultimately didn't succeed. We explored why. Besides, we also discussed why persuasive storytelling is the number one skill for product managers and how to master it. And ultimately, Roshan shared a provocative thought on why the product community needs to significantly improve how we develop the next generation of product leaders. Welcome to the show, Roshan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Welcome, Roshan. And let me dive into the first question right away. So, about 2 years ago, you had a job that most PMs would dream about. So, a group product manager at Google leading over 300 people. So, how did it come that you decided to leave Google and start a one-person company, which is a huge risk?
When you say it like that, I'm like, wow, why did I leave Google to start a one-person company? But, at the time, in my personal life, my family and I had made a decision that we wanted to move to Europe and to Portugal. It's something that we wanted to do for a while, and it was never a good time. And I could do a whole probably show on, what it takes to make a decision like that. Since I was taking such a big risk in my personal life, I thought, why not blow up my work life at the same time and take a risk? But really, it makes me think of the theme of this show, which is you have to take risks. If you want growth, you have to take risks. And I don't take risks, I take calculated risks. But yeah, there's still a risk of failure. And I found in my 25 plus year career, the more comfortable I got with failure or the idea that I could fail, the more comfortable I got taking these bigger and bigger risks. So I decided to leave Google and start a one-person company because it's something I haven't done before. The reason I did it was there was one thing I was very passionate about at Google, which was telling persuasive stories. It's one of the skills that for me defined my career. And I personally think it's the number one skill for PMs is the ability to persuade. And what I noticed was I'd be sitting in promotion committees. There'd be really incredible PMs, but they wouldn't get promoted because they couldn't influence the org. They couldn't tell the story of what their teams have done. And when you're a leader, it all becomes about your ability to persuade. When you're a leader, there's not one thing you can do to move the needle. It's about your ability to rally entire teams, entire orgs with the strength of your message. And so I would see all these amazing PMs not move forward because they didn't have this skill of persuasive storytelling and nobody taught it. And so for me, I saw this as an opportunity to teach this skill, something I'm passionate about. And that's why I left Google, to take a risk when I moved to Portugal and try teaching this skill that matters so much to me.
Because you mentioned persuasion as an important skill, there's a rule of thumb that worked for me quite well in the past, which is that persuasion usually doesn't happen in group meetings. What worked very well for me personally is that you try to get buy-in in individual sessions, and then in a group meeting, you already are aligned and you're just discussing the formalities. Do you have any other tips or long-term tips in order to be a better persuader for PMs, but also for leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love this topic, so I can go on and on, but I can sum up great storytelling in one sentence, which is you have to focus your audience on a compelling message that they can trust. And there's three pieces there. It's clarity, it's compelling, and it's credible. Clarity is the focus. So it's so common for PMs to try to add all the information they possibly could to their message. And sometimes it's because they want to make sure they've covered everything just in case, they don't know who the audience is. Sometimes they just want to look smart. But here's the analogy I give. Imagine a glass of red wine, European Portuguese wine. Let's go with that. And that's all the good stuff. That's the stuff that you want your audience to, enjoy and savor. And that's the good stuff. But all the other information we add is like water. And we're adding water to all of our good stuff. And what ends up happening is we dilute the good stuff. So, that focus and learning how to get straight to the European Portuguese wine is critical for storytelling. But just because your audience understands the message doesn't mean that they care about it. And that's probably the biggest area that I see PMs miss or fail at, which is tying their story to something their audience deeply, deeply wants. And so there's a whole bunch of ways to do that, but, finding a way to make your story relevant to the person is what is going to change their behavior. If you're presenting or telling a story and you want someone to change, the only thing more powerful than someone who has to change is someone who wants to change. So that's the whole making it compelling. And then I'd say trust is sort of the foundation of everything. And the example I like to give is, as a PM, if two engineering leaders approached you with the exact same pitch, exact same proposal, they have to pause development for 3 weeks to tackle technical debt. But one of them over communicates, always delivers when they say they'll deliver. And the other one doesn't really communicate, is known for delaying, is known for overestimating what they can get done. It's literally the exact same pitch, but there's one of them that will work and one of them that won't. And so you have to make your message clear. You have to make it compelling. But that trust is something you build over all the stories you tell. It's not just the story that's in front of you. That trust is the foundation. So I'd say to any listeners out there, work on those 3 aspects of your storytelling and you'll crush it.
What I think is so interesting about this is that many PMs have applied this type of storytelling to their products. So within their products, they try to create clarity. They try to get to the point very quickly. They try to communicate the value of the product very quickly. But then when they communicate, they don't apply this. They don't start with the benefit or the point. They start with, I don't know, a whole story where they lose the audience 3 times over and then get to the point at one point when no one is listening anymore.
Yeah.
And I think this is so interesting, right? Like whenever they work on their products, they go straight to applying the skill of clarity. But then when it comes to themselves and them personally, they forget everything they know and they just go into babbling and trying to tell this story without any of these skills applied.
Yeah. And it's not just a PM issue. Honestly, storytelling cuts across all the functions. But it pains me when I see these people who've worked so hard on things that matter so deeply to them and their teams. But to your point, they go up and they present it and people are distracted. They're on their phones. They're not paying attention. And, they've done amazing work, but nobody teaches you how to communicate it. And so all that effort they put into making their product clear and simple, but if they can't communicate it, it's lost. The impact's lost. The analogy I like to give is you can create the most amazing movie script, the most amazing product. But if you then film the movie and everything is like a close-up or there's no lighting, your message won't get across, no matter how good your script is. And I think, Stefan, that's exactly what you're saying, which is you can put all this investment in making the product great, but if you can't communicate it, it's still going to fall flat.
Yep, I love it.
Sorry, what was the skill or a?
Talent.
Tenant. So this is, I believe very strongly that you don't have to be born a good storyteller. I was not born a good storyteller. It's a skill you can learn. And it defined my career. When I got promoted at Google, right before I left, I was leading a team of, I think, 8 or 9 product managers. It was Google Messages was a 300 plus org. And in my promo rationale, it called out storytelling as a major reason for my promotion. And like I said, I wasn't a good storyteller. So you absolutely can learn this skill. I had to do it the hard way, but I don't think PMs need to do it the hard way. And that's why I created my business and why I have a course and teach what I know.
Nice. Love it. We're going to link to that. Roshan, okay, let's get to the heart of today's discussion, which is your failure story.
Yes.
So some of our listeners might remember Google Allo, which was a messaging service from Google, which was introduced in 2016, but later terminated in April 2018. Can you tell us more about what happened?
Yeah. So, I joined Google in August 2016, and I was in charge of growth at Allo and at Duo at the time. And, I think about a month or two after I joined in August 2016, we launched it. But then in April 2018, we announced we were pausing development. And then I shut down the service in March of 2019, about a year later. So, it was an interesting experience because Google made a huge splash about Allo and Duo was still around. And it was a huge undertaking, huge investment. And I remember, when we shut it down, it triggered all these news cycles about how Google's shutting down yet another service. Everyone brings up the dear memory of Google Reader and how that went away. It was an interesting thing to be there for the launch of this product and then having to shut it down much later.
Can you maybe tell us more what Google Allo was, what the product did?
Yeah. So Allo was a messaging app, but let me give a little bit more context behind it. And so initially, Google invested in two messaging apps. It had Google Allo and it had the SMS app, Google Messages. That was called Android Messages at the time, that came with every single phone. And the reason it, invested in these two strategies is because Google knew that chat messages and chat messaging apps were taking over social networking. And I worked at Facebook before Google, and I remember seeing graph after graph of how messaging apps were, taking over as where people spend their time. And social networks, including people spending time on Facebook, was declining. And so Google had to have a horse in the race with messaging. And Facebook had bought WhatsApp, they had Messenger. So Google was sort of behind. And so it did two strategies. It had to build a messaging app for SMS because every phone had to come with it. But then it invested in Allo because the nice thing about Allo is you can control the speed of innovation and how quickly we brought new features to the users. And so that's why we invested in Allo. It let us have complete control over the experience. The problem is, and we can talk about this, distribution was tough. And I think it's what ultimately killed the app. Compare that to, Google Messages. You had universal reach. If you had a phone number, you can reach anybody with SMS. And every Android phone has to have an SMS app installed. The problem is the pace of innovation is slow because SMS is like I think 40-year-old standard at this point. And there's only so much you could do with that. So hopefully that explains, why Google had sort of these two messaging apps, but why it invested in Allo. It was about speed of innovation.
So back in the day, right? So because I think like a messaging app like Allo or WhatsApp is like what I would call a truly viral product, right? So it only works if all your friends also use it, or at least a good portion of it. So what was the idea to solve this, right? Because when you start, none of your friends have it installed on their phones. So what was the idea? What was the plan to solve this virality problem?
Yeah, I called it the empty room problem. So, we convince you to download Allo, you install it, super excited to try it out, go to chat with someone and there's nobody there. And so, there were a couple ways that we tried to solve this. One was launching in very specific markets, smaller markets where we can hopefully, convince enough people to download the app such that, you could get the chance of finding someone if we saturate a market who's on the app is higher. So that was one, which was how we launched and distributed it. The second one, we tried a couple different tricks. So one was letting you actually message anybody through Allo, but if they didn't have Allo, we would take the message you sent in Allo and actually SMS it to them. Mm-hmm. And then they could respond to SMS and it would show up in Allo for you. And so this was our, big idea for solving that empty room problem. The challenge is that if I were to send you a message in Allo and you get it as SMS, you don't get it from my phone number. You got it from a central phone number that Google Allo control. And so oftentimes we'd find that the recipients of these messages would be super confused as to, who was sending this to them. And so, it ultimately didn't work. It was a clever idea, but it wasn't enough to overcome exactly the problem you outlined, which is how do you get enough virality?
And can you walk us through this process a little bit? So you launched Allo, you tried to grow it. What were the conversations that you had? What were the decisions that needed to be taken up to the point where you shut it down in March of 2019?
Yeah. So we launched Allo, and, there were the standard efforts you would expect, which is marketing and awareness, trying to saturate specific markets. I was in charge of the growth team, so there was plenty of things we tried in the app, from encouraging viral loops and growth loops. There was efforts to add new and innovative features. So Allo was one of the first to integrate Google Assistant. You can call it early AI directly into the experience. And it turned out, from a growth perspective, the people who experienced Google Assistant in a chat were the ones who stuck around the longest. Their retention was through the roof. So, it was only live for about a year, maybe a year and a half, because it was September 2016 to April 2018 when we announced the pause. So in that year and a half, all the activities you would expect for a growing app happened. So the feature announcements, the innovation, and some real innovation, things that, the market hadn't seen. And then all the growth techniques that I was doing. The challenge was distribution was hard. We tried things like, working one-on-one with all of the Android phone manufacturers to try to get them to bundle Allo and Duo. Duo, people understood immediately, like, yes, we need a FaceTime competitor on Android. Allo was a little bit tougher because they had WhatsApp, they had SMS apps, including Google Messages. So that was a bit tougher. Distribution became extremely difficult, but interestingly enough, it was also just not succeeding at the pace that Google expects at its scale. And that always throws me for a loop in terms of, this failure story. Our growth in Google Allo in a year and a half beat Snapchat's growth, I think, after like 3 or 4 years. So we were growing at a fast clip. We had millions of users. But when you operate at a company like Google, millions of users is not enough. And so, it's always interesting because what I consider our failure could have been another startup's incredible success.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
The follow-up question I wanted to ask here was, why do you think a company like WhatsApp, it was a startup, was so successful, and then Google, with all this potential, like investment, potential money to throw at it, wasn't? And I think this answer, I haven't never thought about it, that for you or for Google in this case, you would need hundreds of millions of users to justify the investment, right? While a startup making $1 million ARR would be so happy about that, and they would be through the roof, and then they grow from there and everything's fine. But then Google invests, I don't know, a good amount of money, and then they make $1 million ARR, they shut it down because they're like, this is ridiculous. The 3 people working on this is more expensive than what we make in ARR.
Yeah. I mean, let me split your question into two. One is, why did WhatsApp succeed where Google Allo could not? And then the second thing is, I'll give you some more thoughts on Google pulling the plug too soon. It was actually a decision I didn't agree with, but after a couple months, I agreed with it and I respected it. Starting with why WhatsApp did well when Google Allo did not. WhatsApp was much earlier to the market, and I think a lot of it had to do with market timing. And so what was happening, and I understand this now being someone who lives in Europe, but I didn't at the time. But when you're in the US, SMS and MMS messages were all free. The carrier started off charging you like $10 a month for 200 messages, but pretty soon it became unlimited messages as part of your plan. The problem was in countries like Europe or in India or in different countries in Asia, it would still cost a lot to send SMS messages. Heaven help you if you want to send an MMS message. I think it was like €1 per MMS message. And so in a lot of those markets, people did not want to pay. And so they were looking for an alternative, an over the top app like WhatsApp. And so WhatsApp was in the right place at the right time. People may argue, but I don't think the feature set of WhatsApp is terribly innovative. I see them doing some innovation more recently, but they were the right place at the right time. And then what happens is you get enough people using WhatsApp, and suddenly you have that walled garden effect. You have the fact that you have all your friends on it, and it's very hard to move that social network to another messaging app, which is the problems we ran into. So that's why I think WhatsApp succeeded. I think if Allo was there first, Allo could have taken advantage of the dislike of pricing in some of these countries. It's why WhatsApp didn't succeed as well in countries like the US, and Messenger succeeded instead. Because in the US, messaging was basically free over SMS. And so Messenger stood out, but WhatsApp never got a foothold there because it was not really needed.
I think what's also very interesting about your story is that it shows where you spent most of your time. Maybe that's specific to the messenger industry, but it really seems like you spent most of your time in distribution. How do we get this to market efficiently?
Yeah.
As the feature set that you had to develop seems to be quite clear and not the main differentiating factor anyways. Is that correct?
It is, but I think that was a lesson learned, which is, there's a hope or an optimism that if you build something really unique or novel, like, for example, Google Assistant inside your chat, that will be the thing to get people to move. And Snapchat was the first to introduce sort of the disappearing messages concept. Mm-hmm. They had really significant success. And I think that was a rare example of finding that feature or two that really stood out. But even then, like, they're not even close to WhatsApp and Messenger. And in fact, I think their business has sort of leveled out. So I think from Google's perspective, there was hope we could innovate and draw people closer. But we also knew that investing all of Google's muscle behind distribution was probably going to be the true unlock. And the fact that it didn't work, for all the people out there experiencing product failures, sometimes they're just external forces that are out of your control. They're really hard to control. And I think that was a big takeaway for me is you can have the best strategy, but not everything is going to be in your control.
And one other thing that would interest me is your take. So I tried to look up the messaging market leading up to this, and I saw that, so yesterday actually Telegram released their monthly active users, and I saw that they were founded not too much earlier than Google. I think so they went to market 2014, and yesterday they posted that they have 1 billion monthly active users.
Yeah,
meaning they apparently, I think like what I saw is that with the purchase of WhatsApp by Facebook, this is what kickstarted their growth, and then now concerns in like mostly outside of the US having access to the data, to like the actual messages, then fueled this growth more. So it seems that there, even though maybe 5 years ago it didn't seem like there is a market, it seems that there's still, in those very saturated markets with these network effects, these walled gardens, there still seems to be opportunity to actually win in a market where it seems like WhatsApp was set for the next decades. So what do you think about a company like, for example, Telegram now having won a part of this market that seems to be significant?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Google made a couple missteps in hindsight that made it more difficult, but also I think Allo had traction, and if Google's scale wasn't a concern, it could have had a chance to succeed like Telegram. But I think the plug was pulled because it just wasn't going to achieve Google's bigger goals in the time needed. But what I'd say is, before I get to the missteps, you can go to different places around the world. Like in Korea, there's Kakao Talk. There's, in Japan, they have a messaging app, I think Line, that was very popular there. So you can definitely do well in smaller markets and sort of grow from there. For Google, Allo, actually the intent was to go after markets like India. That was the primary market we were going after. Fun fact, you can't see it now, but if you were to go look at the sticker packs we included with the app when we launched, there's a lot of brown people.
Mhm.
And it's because we were sort of targeting India. And of course, we'd add stickers over time, but we were really focused on that market. What happened was at Google I/O earlier in 2022, Sundar declared, AI was going to be a big thing. AI at the time meant Google Assistant, and Google Assistant would be everywhere. And so when Allo ended up launching, we launched globally. We had intentions to launch in specific markets to get footholds in that saturation. You could see in our app, some of those artifacts that were there. But we ultimately launched globally because it was a bigger deal to talk about Assistant and how it's in everything, including our new messaging app. And so I think that was a misstep in that we suddenly were competing on a global scale and diluted our efforts a bit. So I think there's definitely room to grow. I think if Google Allo had stuck it out, it probably could have done well. But what I'll say, and I kind of alluded to this before, why I respect the strategy and what Google does, it's so easy to play armchair strategist after the fact and look back and say, why is Google doing multiple messaging apps? And, why didn't it just pick one? But the funny thing is, you can just pick one. And if that doesn't work, the armchair strategist, will say, man, why did they pick one? They should have hedged their bets and, built Android messages and done a different app because you don't know which one's going to win. And so one of the lessons learned from this failure story, at least for me personally, is strategy is hard. You don't know, you don't have a crystal ball, you don't know what's going to work. But whatever you end up picking, like make that choice and then commit to it and commit to learning from it after the fact. But for Google, they said, we have the resources, we want to try both for a while. And I appreciate the courage it takes to do that. That's a huge investment on their part. But then when Allo wasn't doing so well, they decided, it wasn't doing well according to what they needed. They decided to stop it and invest fully in Google Messages. And that's when I moved over and eventually ran that team as well. But I respect that decision too. I didn't agree with it at the time because I thought we could do well. But making those hard decisions are not easy. And Google invited a lot of scrutiny with, they're shutting down another service. But it takes guts to innovate. It takes guts to make these big strategic moves. It's so easy for these big companies to play it safe. And I applaud Google for taking these risks.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? And I think with Google, they made billions and billions with ads, and they could have just never went into building so many flavors of software and all these types of products and just be fine with making billions with ads in their network. And they would be more profitable. It would be simpler to run the org if they didn't do all these other things.
Yeah.
I think a lot of great things came out of it. I don't know, I still use like the Google, Docs, Sheets suite every day. And like for 10 years, I've never found something working better for me. And I think there's these products that maybe are not as, profitable as big, but they still keep the brand alive and right. And if you build a company like Google, you want to build it for the next hundreds of years, right? You can't build for an exit anymore that is like in 5 years, because who is going to buy? No one, right? There is no capital to buy Google. So you need to approach this differently. And I think this is what many maybe don't understand when it comes to like Google's product strategy, because from an outsider's perspective, it seems easy, right? Don't build a lot of products no one wants, but obviously if they don't take the risk, there is no winning.
To kind of circle back to the theme of your show about failures, Google isn't afraid to fail. And to your point, there's, I'm sure, lots of failures. Allo is one of them. But then they have wins. I mean, their, Office Suite, is pretty much the next competitor to the Microsoft Office Suite that people thought was untouchable. And so, getting comfortable with failure, not being afraid of failure. And again, just like I took my own risk of moving to Portugal and leaving a job many people would envy to start a one-person company, it's being comfortable with failure that often leads to some of the biggest wins. And I'll say something that may be controversial. People look at the humane pin I've seen a lot of LinkedIn posts where people are like, they should have done this, they should have done that. I can't believe investors spent all that money on something that ended up being horrible. But I applaud them. Like, it takes guts, to build something net new. And sure, they failed, but look, not every big swing you take is going to connect. And not all of us have the stomach to take those big swings, but I applaud the people who do. And I admire the fact that they're willing to take risks. And yeah, sure, the investors lost a lot of money, but they know what they're doing. Like they are taking their own risks. And so, I see this theme of being comfortable with failure, as something I admire and something, I've seen some of the best, successes out there are the people who get that comfort.
Amazing. Yeah, I think after all, this is why we try to do this thing here as well, to bring the light that failure can be a big, a very positive thing. And as we are on the topic of provocative thoughts, I want to move our conversation to our provocative thought corner. In a previous conversation, you said that as a product community, we are not doing a very good job of developing the next generation of product leaders. And would you mind going a bit into that more?
One of the reasons I started my company, AmplifyPM, is because I saw storytelling and the ability to communicate, but also, when you become a leader, it's about your ability to move large groups of people with the strength of your message. So here's a skill that everyone sitting in that promo committee, we all knew they needed this skill and a whole host of others. And we would not promote people who didn't have the skill, but I never really saw any kind of investment or development to help people get these skills. And so I saw really good PMs not move up, and some would eventually figure it out. It would take years and they would move up. And then a lot of people would never figure it out and their careers would stagnate, but unnecessary, it was unnecessary. And so I feel like as a discipline, we need to do a better job growing the next generation of leaders. The analogy I like to give is, I went to MIT, and so lots of Nobel laureates and great researchers, but a lot of them weren't the best teachers. And, teaching is a very different skill set than being a good researcher. And, with a little more training, some of those researchers could have been amazing teachers, but again, it wasn't really taught. And that's what I see now. Like what makes great ICPMs is not the same thing that will make them leaders. You can't lead 100 people the same way you lead 10. It's a fundamentally different skill set. And so I feel like we need to do a better job raising that next generation of leaders.
There's an interesting story there that I can tell. So a couple of years ago, I talked to a founder and we had a conversation that it's important to coach PMs to becoming better and eventually to become leaders. And then her response was, well, to a certain extent, we're not a school, we're a company. So how far should it go? Where should you say, okay, we actually need better people with different skills to excel in a role? And where should you say, okay, this is worth coaching?
Yeah. I fundamentally disagree with that person's sentiment. I use the analogy of the golden goose and the golden egg. As a business leader, I want a golden egg. I want a big milestone achieved. I want value for the business. But when you become a leader, I don't just want the golden egg in front of me. I want golden eggs time and time again. And if you want golden egg after golden egg, you have to look to your golden goose. You have to look at the health of your golden goose. You have to invest in your golden goose. You have to make sure your golden goose is healthy. And the golden goose here, I may not have said, but it's your team. And so I think it's short-term thinking often to just say, we need to bring in the people to hit the next milestone. I think to build a durable company that will give you wins for time to come, you need to invest in that goal. If not investing in your people and upskilling them, then what else will you do? It's expensive to keep hiring talent. There's so much context that builds up in the team that you have, and it doesn't actually take that much investment to upskill and coach these people. If you have Olympic athletes, they all get training coaches because they want to operate at that level. It's not that they're not talented, but if you want to get them to that, elite level, they invest in training coaches. Nobody questions that. If you're a singer, you get a vocal coach. Nobody questions that. If you're a CEO, you often get executive coaching. Nobody questions that. But if you're a PM, somehow if you get a coach, that means you're not able to figure it out on your own, and you just need to figure it out. And I don't know why we do that as a discipline. It's why I've transitioned into coaching. I do storytelling, but now I have a program where I personally sit down for 4 months, one-on-one, and I upskill people. I teach them those skills they need to go from leading 10 people to leading 100. And the transformation in just 4 months is incredible. And they end up doing great things at their companies. And it's not a huge investment. So I think we need to do a better job as an industry encouraging it, normalizing it, and proactively building our teams in this way. I'm all for that healthy golden goose.
And I think the point you made there is quite interesting, right? How professional athletes or like top personnel in like also many professions have like a variety of coaches, right? And I think maybe to draw this line a bit more, because I think obviously product management is a very, I don't know, intellectual profession. So it's not something where you need, I don't know, 17 people helping to improve your body. But I've seen an interview by the current world chess champion, Gukesh. So he's an 18-year-old boy, and he had an interview on how many coaches he has. And he has this huge lineup of coaches. And chess is very mental. I think similar to maybe product management, maybe a bit more complex than product management in many cases. But he had like a nutritionist, a mental coach, a mental health coach. It was like 10 different coaches that he works with on a daily basis to perform on the level that he performs. And I think this is something where we are so far away in like the product field. And I think product even more, because I think then if I look at, for example, engineers, there's more and more services also available where they can train or have like pair programmers helping them. But in product, it seems to be not the case at all. And it's so hard to find like also the right blend of what people need at the different stages. Maybe because it's also just so fluffy and the position is so different in every company that it's just not clear enough what a person needs at every single stage. I mean, like every company I came to, the first thing I had to do was like build a skill matrix of what is expected from a PM in the team. And every time, again and again, it was just not there. And it just seems that, and then for every other position, everyone has a very clear understanding, like C-level, what this position should be doing. And then it comes to product and no one knows. Because before maybe the founders just winged it and hoped for the best, and now they hire someone and they don't know if they should just wing it and hope for the best, but they somehow expect very clear results, not so much clarity in how to invest in your people to actually grow them to the next stage.
100%. I love it's fluffy because I talk about what I do as no fluff, because that's exactly right. So, how many of us as PMs have talked to our manager and says, hey, I feel like I am ready for the next level. Like, what do I need to, get promoted? And you get back ambiguous answers or, you're doing okay, but, we just need time. Or they give you their PM matrix and it's a word salad. Like I've read through these at a lot of companies and I have to read them 10 times and I still don't know what they're saying and I still don't know what the expectations are. So that's what I do. Like in my program, the very first thing is a very clear, crisp understanding of what it means to operate at each level. And even that alone would help PMs across these companies have a clear roadmap of what the gap is to the next level. So then they can come up with a plan to tackle it. Once we identify your gaps, then I personally help you close those gaps. But that's something we need to do as a discipline. I mean, I'm trying to do it in my world, but I think as a product discipline, we can be much better with the clarity and then the support.
Yeah, maybe for the end of the episode, quickly talk about your program. Who is it for? How does it work? What can people learn there?
Yeah, so I started AmplifyPM and created a storytelling course because I still believe that's the number one skill. Since then, I've expanded into this program where the very first thing we do is I'll do a deep dive and I understand exactly where my client's at and what it takes to get to the next level. And I give them extreme clarity. And once we identify those gaps, I help them close it. They can close it by learning the hard way, but it takes years and there's no guarantee they'll master all the right lessons or skills. There is free content out there, but there's actually a ton of it these days. And some of it's hit or miss. There's group coaching and that works too. It's good theory, but it's not personalized. My program in particular is about working with me one-on-one and learning these skills and applying them specifically to your situation. But then the last thing I do once we identify your gaps and we close them is I help my clients position themselves for promotion, because like PM orgs are small. It's not like engineering where you can have, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 engineers per PM. So the opportunity to grow in PM orgs is limited. So the competition is fierce. So even if you've closed all your gaps, you still have to position yourself to be noticed. You still have to build your brand. And that's the last thing I do in my program is I help position you so you get noticed. And when those leadership opportunities open up, you get chosen.
Makes sense. So one thing I noticed that makes you a great storyteller is that you're using a lot of analogies. You use the golden goose analogy. You use the Portuguese wine analogy. Is it also part of your program?
Absolutely. I'll tell you one of the lessons I learned that here's one way I failed in storytelling over and over again. Again, I love this theme of failure, but I felt like I needed to communicate everything to give people an accurate snapshot of what I'm trying to communicate. So I prioritize accuracy. What I've learned since then is accessibility beats accuracy 100% of the time. And what I mean by that is getting one message through clearly beats getting 10 messages through in a confusing, befuddled way that nobody gets. And analogies are a great way to make things accessible. It's actually called schemas. It's in a book called Made to Stick by the Heath brothers, but they're called schemas. And what metaphors do are let you understand something abstract by tying it to something you know. Is it a perfect analogy? It's not. Is drinking wine the perfect analogy for how to create focus? No, but it's enough to deliver that thought. And that was a huge unlock for me, is making something accessible and easy to understand beats accurate information and perfect information every single time. So yeah, I'm a big fan of analogies and metaphors.
I love that. And I think it probably also makes you think about the topic differently as well, right? If you need to make it concrete, you also have to have a good enough understanding to actually find an analogy. And maybe finding that analogy helps you understand it better yourself.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they say teaching is the best way to learn. It's 100% true. So when you have to explain a concept to someone else, it forces you to get really clear. I see PM orgs do this all the time. They'll say, hey, there's a product review coming up. Oftentimes the benefit is once there's a product review, it forces that entire team to rally and clarify and consolidate and present. And it's not that something happens every time you present, but it's a great way to force people to really think about it and clarify their own thinking when they're trying to explain it to somebody else.
Yep, I love it. Thank you, Roshan. Okay, then that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your wisdom. And to our listeners, see you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.